Nolan didn't think twice before sprinting toward the burning car, even with his 7-year-old daughter screaming behind him. "Daddy, no!" Violet's voice cracked, but he was already halfway across the ditch, the fire's heat licking at his skin as he yanked open the twisted door. The woman inside was unconscious, blood dripping from her temple, her designer heels tangled in the crumpled dashboard. Shane didn't know her name, didn't know why she'd been speeding through backroads in a luxury car that didn't belong in this part of town, but he knew she'd die if he didn't move fast. Come on, he grunted, fighting the jammed seatbelt. The metal burned his hands, smoke stung his eyes, and the flames were too close now. He finally freed her, hoisting her into his arms just as the engine growled, then exploded behind him. Violet screamed again as Shane stumbled back onto the gravel, shielding the woman with his body. The next thing he knew, the paramedics were there, and someone was shouting about a hospital. Shane barely got out his name before they rushed her into the ambulance. He stood there, shirt torn, hands blackened, arms still burning from the heat, while Violet clung to his waist, crying into his side. The next morning started like any other, at least for the first few minutes. Shane was flipping pancakes for Violet in their tiny kitchen, trying to ignore the ache in his hands, when the whole house started vibrating. "What the hell?" he muttered, stepping outside. A helicopter. A massive, sleek black one. And it was landing right in the middle of their backyard. Violet gasped, her mouth full of pancake. "Daddy? Are they here for us?" I don't know." The door opened, and a man in a suit stepped out. Sunglasses, earpiece, the whole thing. He looked like he belonged in a movie. "Shane Nolan? Yeah? You saved Miss Everly Faulkner yesterday. She'd like to speak with you. Right now." Shane blinked. "Who?" The man didn't answer. Just gestured to the chopper. Violet tugged his arm. "Can I come?" The suited man finally cracked a smile. "Miss Faulkner insisted both of you come." The helicopter ride didn't last long, but the view was something else: rolling hills, private land, and then a mansion. Not just big, but ridiculous. Like 10 of their houses stacked on top of each other with fountains and gardens and its own lake. Shane couldn't even wrap his head around it. They landed on a private pad beside the mansion. A nurse was waiting. "She's awake now," she said. "She asked for you personally?" Inside, everything smelled like money. Marble floors, gold trim, flowers in every corner. Violet clung to his hand, wide-eyed. They were led into a massive bedroom, where a woman sat propped up against pillows. Her hair was still a little messy, her face pale, but she was stunning. Elegant, even with bruises. She looked at Shane, then at Violet. And her whole face softened. "You must be Shane," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat. "Yeah. That's me. And this is my daughter, Violet." Everly gave Violet a warm smile. "Hi, sweetheart." Violet stared. "Are you a princess?" Everly let out a tired laugh. "Not quite. But thank you." Shane shifted awkwardly. "Look, I'm just glad you're okay. I didn't do it for anything." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it even more remarkable." She paused, then looked him dead in the eye. "You saved my life. You and your daughter." Shane shrugged. "It was just instinct." "No," Everly said firmly. "It was heroic." There was a long silence. "I couldn't sleep thinking about you too," she said. "And what if you hadn't come by that road? What if you hadn't stopped?" "I did," Shane said quietly. "That's all that matters." Everly nodded slowly. Then she turned to her assistant. "Will you show Violet the playroom?" The assistant smiled. "We have a massive trampoline inside." Violet's eyes lit up. "Wait, inside?" Shane hesitated, but Everly reached toward him. "I swear she'll be safe. I want to talk to you. Alone." When Violet was out of earshot, Everly looked at Shane in a way that made him feel completely seen. And completely nervous. I know you don't want anything from me, she began. But I do want to give you something. He held up a hand. I'm not taking money. I wasn't going to offer you a check, she said, almost amused. I was going to offer you a job. Shane blinked. A job? You're a contractor, right? You've been out of steady work for 6 months. His brows drew together. How do you know that? I did a background check this morning, she said bluntly. Don't look at me like that. I needed to know who pulled me from a fire. You're a single dad, you've been trying to make ends meet, and you've applied to dozens of jobs that don't pay you what you're worth. Shane looked away. I have 3 properties under renovation. I need someone I can trust. Someone who doesn't kiss up to me. Someone like you. He rubbed the back of his neck. You don't even know me. I know enough, she said. You risked your life for someone you didn't know. That tells me everything. Shane swallowed. And if I say no? She smiled. Then I'll keep offering until you say yes. They were driven home in a town car with leather seats and a driver who called him Sir. Violet fell asleep halfway through, her arms wrapped around a stuffed giraffe Everly had given her that probably cost more than their mortgage. Shane stared out at the road, thinking about the fire, about Everly's eyes, and about the way she looked at him when he said he wasn't after her money. He should have felt out of place. But something about her didn't scream rich girl. Something about her felt more lonely. And maybe, just maybe, he knew exactly what that felt like. The paint was peeling off the trim of Shane's porch by the time Everly arrived 3 days later in a slate-gray Bentley that didn't belong anywhere near their neighborhood. Violet pressed her face to the window, breath fogging the glass. Is she coming in? She whispered. Shane didn't answer. He was still trying to figure out whether opening that door meant accepting a job or something else entirely. He hadn't returned her calls. Not because he didn't want the work, he needed it, but because every time he thought about her voice, calm and persistent, he remembered the way she looked at him in that hospital bed. Not grateful. Not indebted. Just curious. Like she saw something in him he didn't see in himself. He opened the door before she could knock. You found it, he said. She stepped inside without hesitation, heels clicking against the cracked tiles. Your neighbor with the wind chimes gave me directions. And a lecture about parking too close to her hydrangeas. Shane closed the door behind her. You really didn't have to drive out here. I wanted to see where you work. She glanced around the living room. And where you live. There were toys scattered near the couch, dishes drying on the counter, a laundry basket half folded. He cleared his throat. It's not a palace. It's honest. She ran her fingers along the edge of the mantel. Did you build that shelf yourself? He nodded. Salvaged oak. Took me a week longer than I planned. It's beautiful. He crossed his arms, still unsure where this was going. You said you needed renovations done? I do. But I also wanted to ask you about something else. From her bag, she pulled out a folder and handed it to him. Inside were blueprints, sprawling estate plans, detailed sketches, and notes scribbled in the margins. This is a historical lodge in Vermont, she said. It's been in my family for decades. My father tried restoring it once, but he passed before it was finished. Shane studied the layout. The structure was massive, old world, covered in ivy and history. Looks like a full rebuild. It is, she said. And I want you to lead it. He raised an eyebrow. Why me? She leaned against the kitchen counter. Because you don't just fix things. You care about them. You didn't run from that fire. You didn't ask for anything. You look at broken things and figure out how to make them whole again. He placed the folder on the table. That's a lot of trust for someone you barely know. I trust my instincts. And I trust people who don't try to impress me. He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. Everly looked around the house again, more carefully this time. Do you have anyone who could watch Violet while you're working? Shane hesitated. Her mom's not in the picture. I usually bring her with me if it's safe. Otherwise, I trade shifts with the neighbor. I'd cover childcare. And travel. Housing too, if you stay on site. He stared at her. That's more than generous. She shrugged. I don't do anything halfway. Before he could respond, Violet peeked around the hallway corner. Daddy, is that your boss? Everly crouched slightly, her tone softening. Do you like snow, Violet? Violet's eyes lit up. We've never seen real snow. Only the fake kind at the mall. Everly smiled. Well, Vermont is covered in snow this time of year. I'm thinking about having a big project there. Maybe with hot cocoa and sledding breaks. Violet ran to Shane and tugged on his sleeve. Can we go? He crouched beside her. It's not a vacation, kiddo. It's work. But there's cocoa. Everly laughed. Shane looked up at her. We'd have to leave soon, wouldn't we? By the weekend. The permits are already approved. I've got a full team. Just missing someone who knows how to keep everything standing when the weather turns. He stood, running a hand through his hair. I'll need to talk to Mrs. Luntz next door. She watches Violet when I'm on call. I'll have my assistant coordinate with her, Everly said. And I'll send a car Friday morning. You don't ask, do you? Shane said, half smiling. You just decide. She tilted her head. I don't force anyone. I just make it very hard to say no. By the time the Bentley pulled away, Violet was already packing her backpack with mittens and coloring books. Shane stood by the window, folder still in hand, staring at the blueprints like they might collapse under the weight of what this meant. He'd been a contractor most of his life. But no one had ever believed in him like this. Not like she did. And that more than the lodge, more than the paycheck was what scared him the most. The Vermont air hit Shane's face like a slap, sharp, dry, and freezing. Snow crunched under his boots as he stepped onto the gravel drive in front of the lodge, a hulking stone and timber structure set against a forest of bare trees. Violet clung to his side, bundled in a puffy pink coat 3 sizes too big, her breath visible in the cold. A man in a wool coat waved them forward from the porch. You must be the Nolans. Welcome to Faulkner Lodge. Shane adjusted the duffel on his shoulder. You're with the restoration crew? Property manager. Name's Colin. Miss Faulkner's inside. She asked me to give you a tour before she arrives with the architects. Violet looked up at the lodge in awe. Is this a castle or a house? Colin chuckled. Bit of both, kiddo. Inside, the heat hit immediately, dry and humming from vents tucked behind carved wooden panels. The foyer was massive, with a spiral staircase and chandeliers that hadn't been dusted in years. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old stone. Shane scanned the space. You said she's not here yet? She's flying in from Boston. Weather held up the jet. Should land within the hour. Violet wandered toward a hearth bigger than their entire kitchen. Can I sit here? Colin nodded. Fire's gas-fed. Safe and warm. Shane crouched beside her, unzipping her coat. Stay close. I'll be just over there. He followed Colin down a hallway lined with faded oil paintings and cracked sconces. The deeper they went, the more of the building's bones showed warped floorboards, drafts sneaking through old seams, walls straining under decades of neglect. She really wants this fixed up? Shane asked, running a hand along the exposed beam. She's determined. It was her grandfather's favorite place. She used to spend summers here before the family moved south. Shane frowned. She mentioned her father owned it. He did. After her grandfather passed, her dad inherited it, but he barely touched it. Let it rot while he played executive in Manhattan. She was still in college when he died and took over the estate herself. Shane stopped walking. She owns all this? Colin gave him a look. She owns half the mountain. They returned to the foyer just as the front door opened. Everly stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat, cheeks flushed from the cold. Her boots were lined with fur, her scarf the color of wine, and her eyes locked onto Shane's like she'd been searching for them all day. "We made it," he said. "I see that." She walked toward them, but knelt first in front of Violet. "Did you find the fireplace?" Violet nodded. "It's huge. Bigger than our bathtub." Everly smiled. "Wait until you see the attic. It has an old telescope and a secret door." Shane raised an eyebrow. "A secret door?" "Behind the wardrobe in the north wing. My grandfather used to hide candy in there." She stood, brushing her hands together. "I thought you might want to see the plans in person. You could have just emailed them." "I could have," she said evenly. "But I wanted to be here when you walked into this place. I wanted to see what you saw." He looked around again. "Mostly rot and water damage. And potential," she added. They moved into the old dining hall, where a long table was covered in blueprints, sketches, and samples of reclaimed wood and stone. A laptop sat open beside a leather-bound binder. Everly pulled out a chair. "This is where I need your eye. The architects want to modernize everything. Knock down half the walls. But I want to keep the soul of it. You know craftsmanship. You understand what's worth preserving." Shane leaned over the plans. "You're trying to save something that was never meant to be perfect." "Exactly." Her voice softened. "It reminds me of someone." He looked up, but before he could speak, Colin returned, clearing his throat. "Apologies. There's an issue with the south foundation. Snowmelt seeping into the crawlspace." Shane stood immediately. "Show me." Everly stepped aside. "Boots are by the mudroom. I'll stay with Violet." He hesitated. "You sure? She's already claimed my office chair and started drawing on my meeting notes." "We're good." Outside, Shane followed Colin around the side of the lodge. Snow had begun to fall again, gentle and steady. They reached a sunken section where the ground sloped toward the foundation. Water pooled in the trench, seeping into cracks between the stones. "This'll freeze by morning," Shane muttered. "Pressure's gonna split the mortar. Think you can stabilize it?" "I'll need a heat pump, drainage pipe, and one hell of a tarp. And someone who doesn't mind crawling under frozen beams." Colin grinned. "We've got 2 guys from Montreal who don't blink at this stuff. I'll get them started." When Shane returned to the lodge, the dining room was empty. He heard laughter echoing from upstairs and followed the sound to a long corridor he hadn't explored yet. He found them in a narrow room lined with bookshelves and a dusty piano. Violet sat beside Everly on the floor, crayons scattered around them. Everly held up a drawing 2 stick figures in a giant wooden house. "This is you," Violet said, pointing at the taller figure. "And that's Daddy." Everly glanced up. "He's taller than me, huh?" Violet nodded. "And stronger." Everly smiled at Shane, but her eyes didn't let go of his. "But I bet you're the brave one." He stepped inside, brushing snow from his jacket. "I don't usually get drawn in crayon." "First time for everything," she said. He crouched beside them. "I saw the crawl space. We'll need to reinforce the whole side before winter deepens. Might have to redirect the runoff through a new culvert." She nodded. "Whatever you need." He paused, studying her face. "You trust fast." "Not usually." Her voice dropped. "But I'm learning to listen when something feels right." He didn't answer right away. The room was quiet except for the wind tapping against the window and the occasional scratch of Violet's crayon. "She thinks this place is magic," he said finally. Everly looked down at the drawing. "So did I. Before it was taken from me." Shane turned to her. "Who took it?" "My father." Her voice caught slightly. "Not on purpose. But neglect can be just as cruel as theft." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time someone built it back right." She looked at him then, really looked, and something between them shifted, unspoken but undeniable. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet. I didn't bring you here because you saved me, Shane. I brought you here because I didn't know I needed saving until you showed up. Snow blanketed the roof in silence as Shane stepped onto the third-story balcony with his gloves still dusted in sawdust. The sharp bite of early morning air grounded him in a way he hadn't felt in years. Below him, the restoration site buzzed to life, trucks reversing, scaffolding rattling, voices calling out over the wind. But here, up above it all, the world felt still. He leaned over the rail, watching workers haul and reclaim pine from the local mill. The crew had doubled in size since his arrival. Everly hadn't questioned a single expense. She just nodded each time he laid out a plan, then handed it off to her operations team with full confidence. The door behind him creaked open. Didn't expect you to be up before sunrise, Everly said, her arms wrapped around a wool blanket the color of rust. Shane glanced at her. Didn't expect you to find me up here. She stepped forward, brushing a curl from her cheek. Colin said you haven't slept more than 4 hours in a week. There's too much to fix, he said simply. I hired you to manage the rebuild, she said, resting her hand on the rail beside his. Not burn yourself out proving something. He didn't respond right away. She turned toward him. You're not doing this to prove you're good enough for me, are you? The question hung in the air like mist. I'm doing this because I don't want to fail you, he said finally. You gave me a chance. I want to be worth that. You already are, she said softly. Even if you never lifted another hammer. Shane's jaw tensed. That's not how I work. Everly nodded, her breath curling in the cold. And how do you work exactly? I build things with my hands. That's how I breathe. But lately, it's more than that. He turned to her. This place? It's starting to feel like something I want to protect. Not just fix. Everly's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Shane's voice dropped. That's dangerous. Why? Because it has nothing to do with the job anymore. She looked at him for a long moment, then stepped closer, the wind tugging at the edge of her blanket. Do you remember what you said to me when I offered you the job? She asked. I said I wasn't after your money. No, she said. You said you didn't want anything from me. He exhaled slowly. I remember. I want to give you something now, she said. But not a check. Not a title. Just something real. Shane's brow furrowed. What? Her hand found his. A place that doesn't leave. A future that doesn't vanish the second you stop working. His heart thudded hard. You don't know what you're offering. I do, she said. And I'm not asking for an answer now. I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere. Before he could reply, Violet's voice echoed up from the courtyard. Daddy? Everly. Come see. The sleds are here. Everly smiled. Saved by the 6-year-old. Shane chuckled under his breath. She's 7. Right. I'll never get that wrong again. They found Violet in the snow-covered driveway, bouncing in place beside a stack of wooden sleds and a pair of massive black dogs that someone from the staff had brought over. She was already bundled in layers, her cheeks pink with anticipation. Colin said there's a hill behind the lodge. She beamed. Can we go now? Shane raised an eyebrow. You bribing the staff with cookies again? They were banana muffins this time, she said proudly. Everly crouched beside her. Let's race. Loser makes hot cocoa. Violet gasped. Deal. The three of them trudged through the snow, sleds in hand, until they reached the top of a hill that overlooked the frozen pond. Shane helped Violet climb onto the front of his sled, her laughter filling the air as they launched downward, snow spraying behind them like fireworks. Everly barreled after them, her laughter just as loud, hair flying behind her like a banner. They tumbled into the snowbank at the bottom, breathless and red-faced. Violet rolled over, giggling uncontrollably. I win, she declared. Shane looked at Everly, who lay beside them in the snow, her blanket long gone, eyes shining. I think we all did, Everly said quietly. Later that evening, after cocoa and grilled cheese in the kitchen, Shane stepped into the great room alone. The fire crackled behind him as he studied the old portrait above the mantel. Everly's grandfather, standing in front of a much younger version of the lodge. Colin entered, carrying a stack of invoices. Permission to interrupt? Shane nodded. What's up? Colin handed him a manila folder. Latest cost projections. And a note. Shane opened the folder. Tucked between sheets was a handwritten card. You've rebuilt more than just a house. I hope you know that. He closed the folder, throat tightening. Everything okay? Colin asked. Yeah, Shane said, almost to himself. Better than okay. The next morning, Everly found him in the solarium, sketching new designs for the East Wing's restoration. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him. You never stop, she said. Shane looked up, expression unreadable. I've been thinking. About? What happens when this place is finished? She crossed the room slowly. It doesn't have to end. I want to keep building, he said. But not just houses. I want something solid. Something lasting. Everly's eyes didn't waver. So do I. He stood, the sketchpad falling closed behind him. I was never looking for this, he said. But I've never wanted anything more. She reached for his hand. Then let's build it. The next spring, the lodge reopened in a soft ceremony with nothing but the crew, a few neighbors from the valley, and Violet tossing wildflower petals from the second-floor balcony. The air smelled like cut pine and blooming lilacs. Shane stood in the restored foyer, now lined with new beams and old stories, watching Everly laugh with Violet as they hung a framed photo of the three of them beside the hearth. He walked to them, slid an arm around Everly's waist, and kissed her temple. Home looks good on you, he murmured. She turned to him, eyes full of something steady and fearless. It looks even better on you. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Inside, the fire glowed. And for the first time in a long, long time, everything felt exactly where it belonged. By the time the final beam was locked into place, the sun had begun its slow descent behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across the renovated terrace. The lodge stood fully restored, gleaming with a quiet pride, its stonework polished, its timbers sealed, its soul intact. Shane stood with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the main facade. For the first time, he wasn't searching for flaws or planning the next fix. It was done. And more than that, it was right. He heard her footsteps before she spoke. I think my grandfather would have cried if he saw it this way, Everly said, stopping at his side. Shane didn't take his eyes off the lodge. You gave it back its dignity. You rebuilt it. He turned to her, his voice low. We did. Everly reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small brass key. This used to open the original cellar door. It's the last piece of the past I've been holding on to. Shane took it, the metal warm from her hand. You want me to keep it? I want you to have it, she said. Because this place wouldn't be standing without you. And neither would I. He studied her face, the way the fading light caught the curve of her cheek. I didn't expect to find a life here. And I didn't expect to find love in the middle of a construction site, she said, smiling gently. Yet here we are. Shane glanced at the terrace steps where Violet sat cross-legged beside a sketchpad, her tongue between her teeth as she carefully drew the new entryway. She calls you ours now, you know. Everly's eyes softened. She told me yesterday. Said I was part of the family, even if I wasn't official yet. Shane exhaled, his voice rough. I've been thinking about that. She faced him fully, her expression unreadable. I spent years just surviving, he said. One job to the next, making sure she had what she needed, never letting myself think about wanting more. I know, she said quietly. But now I wake up and she's laughing with you in the kitchen, and I go to bed with your hand on my back, and everything in me says this is what home is supposed to feel like. A gust of wind rustled the trees behind them. Everly didn't move. He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. I don't have a ring with a stone the size of Europe. I don't have a yacht or a private island or whatever you were probably promised by men who wore $1,000 watches. I never wanted any of that, she said. He opened the box. Inside was a simple band of brushed gold, its edges slightly imperfect. I made this in the woodshop. Took me 4 nights and ruined 2 other pieces trying to get it right. It's not extravagant, but it's real. Like us. Everly stared at it, then at him, tears forming but not falling. I don't care if we do it in front of a crowd or just us and Violet in the backyard under that crooked maple, Shane said. But I want to marry you. I want to build something that lasts longer than timber and stone. She didn't hesitate. Yes, she breathed, her voice shaking. Yes. 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder. He held her tightly, grounding them both. A small voice piped up from the steps. Does this mean we get to have cake? Shane laughed, pulling back just enough to see Everly smile. You're in charge of that, she called to Violet. Chocolate and strawberries, she said firmly, already digging into her sketch pad to draw the cake. That night, they set up a bonfire behind the lodge. The crew had gathered, along with a few locals who had spent their childhoods skating on the now cleared pond. Music drifted from a portable speaker, and someone brought out marshmallows. Violet ran from group to group, telling everyone she was now officially the boss's daughter. Shane found Everly sitting on the edge of the wooden bench, her fingers wrapped around a mug of cider. He sat beside her, brushing a bit of ash from her sleeve. I didn't think I'd find someone who could carry as much as I do, he said. She tilted her head. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. He kissed her, slow and certain, with the firelight dancing behind them and the cold forgotten. The next morning, the world was quiet again. They lay in bed beneath a thick quilt, the window cracked just enough to let in the scent of pine and smoke. Violet's soft humming drifted in from the hallway. Shane turned to Everly, brushing her hair from her face. We should pick a date. She blinked sleepily. For the wedding? No, he said. For the life we start. I'm ready now. So am I. They married that spring, in the clearing behind the lodge where the wildflowers came up in bursts of yellow and violet. Violet walked down the aisle first, carrying a bouquet nearly as big as her. The guests were friends, staff, and a few old-timers who'd helped restore pieces of the lodge that no blueprint could replicate. Shane stood in a slate-gray suit, his hands steady, his eyes never leaving Everly as she walked toward him in a dress as simple and stunning as the life they'd built. There were no grand speeches or flashy moments, just promises whispered between 2 people who had already lived the vows long before they ever said them aloud. Afterward, they danced on the terrace under string lights and a sky full of stars. Violet stole the show with a choreographed routine she'd practiced in secret, and Shane lifted her high in the air to a chorus of laughter and applause. As the last song played and the candles burned low, Everly leaned against Shane's chest, her voice a breath against his collarbone. Everything I ever thought I needed, none of it mattered until I met you. He kissed her forehead, holding her close. You saved me long before I ran into that fire. Together they walked back into the lodge, no longer just a house, but a home. Every room held a memory, every window framed a future. The past had been rebuilt, but what they had now was something entirely new. And it would last.